alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Oh no, he's hot!
Hot rodent boyfriend or a sexy rat man.
You must bounce on it. Crazy style.
All right, where to even begin? We've got a lot on the agenda today. Hot rodent boyfriends, Pete Davidson, Ariana Grande, Dracula, Nosferatu, of course, Girl Who's Going to Be Okay. Let's start here. Yes, Possession. Possession is Andrzej Żuławski's 1981 horror-ish film, of which you've probably at least seen the iconic subway station crash-out scene. I've seen it a few times, but Possession remains quite difficult to describe. In the most straightforward terms, it tells of the horrific unraveling of a marriage between its leads, Anna and Mark. It's a film that is both dreamlike and nightmarish, intimate and political, and of interest to me here, human and monstrous. Mark suspects that his wife Anna is having an affair and gets a private investigator on the case. And she is having an affair, but that's also not all she's doing. In fact, the affair should honestly be the least of Mark's worries, because, as we eventually discover, Anna's secret apartment houses a creature, a truly disgusting, horrifying thing to which she presumably feeds the corpses of the private investigator and others, and indeed has sex with. In my interpretation, this monster is a manifestation of Anna's sexual desire and her urge for independence, to have and create something that is her own, separate from her husband. This video essay is not about possession, but it is about this monster. Rather, it will be about cinematic monsters, namely Dracula and Frankenstein, the classics, who I believe function as projections and manifestations of women's sexuality, much as Anna's creature was. Two very recent interpretations of each of these monsters have brought their sexual subtext to the forefront, and not just within their scripts. They are Robert Eggers' Nosferatu. Nosferatu itself is an adaptation of Dracula, which I'll get to later, and Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein. In particular, both films' casting of young, attractive, and heartthrobbing actors as these creatures is of interest to me. With Bill Skarsgård as the Count and Jacob Elordi as the monster, it's surely no stretch to say that these adaptations are intending to pose the beings as objects of desire. As you'll see, women audiences' desire for these monsters is not anything new. In fact, one could say Dracula and Frankenstein always have been hot. But monster tales and movies are and always have been symptoms of the historical moments at which they are created. The Frankenstein of 2025 might not symbolize the same things as the Frankenstein of 1931. And though it seems trivial, I do think these recent monster films can tell us a lot about gender relations and sexual politics at this specific moment in time. And to take it one step further, I think there is a huge connection to be made between these monster castings and the way young women talk about physical attraction in online spaces, with micro terminology like ugly hot, medium ugly, and of course, hot rodent boyfriend. So what is so hot about the unhot? I think classic monsters hold the answer. Oh, and one more thing, I know that the doctor is Frankenstein and the monster is Frankenstein's monster, but there will probably be a few times in this video where I refer to the monster as Frankenstein. I know the difference. That just is gonna happen probably, and we're gonna be okay with it, okay? This term I keep using, classic monsters, usually refers to the several horror films produced by Universal Pictures from about the 1930s through 1950s, which featured a monster, an inhuman or semi-human being, as its main source of terror. Notable monsters of this era included Dracula and Frankenstein, of course, as well as Wolfman, the Invisible Man, and the creature from the Black Lagoon. Other studios also quickly hopped on the monster movie trend, giving us other classics such as King Kong. There were a good number of female monsters to come out of this era, but with the exception of The Bride of Frankenstein, those with the strongest legacies are male. And yet these male monsters were almost always threats to the patriarchal order, not proponents of it. Classic monster films followed a pretty common formula. An upstanding, ambitious man with a beautiful love interest goes too far in his endeavors, either creating, discovering, or becoming an inhuman being. The monster threatens the town and, even worse, threatens the sanctimonious heterosexual coupling. He develops a fixation, perhaps even a sexual attraction, to the heroine. But ultimately he is defeated, the heroine is returned to her socially acceptable possessor, love wins, the end. It's a paradoxical formula. Toxic masculine pride unleashes the monster, but the monster bears the brunt of the punishment. Perhaps because, in 1930s terms, the monster attacks society's most vulnerable. Women, or sometimes children, or in today's terms, some combination of the two, women devoid of personal autonomy. Fay Wray, squirming in the palm of King Kong, for instance, evokes a child's Barbie doll more than a fully realized woman. The heroine could easily be read as helpless against the monster's brute force or his spells of supernatural manipulation. But in bringing their heroines' perspectives to the forefront, Eggers and Del Toro's recent monster movie adaptations show that these women aren't just unafraid of these monsters, they're empathetic and even curious towards them, particularly even in the sexual way. I theorize that to female audiences, the heroine's reciprocated sexual desire for the monster is something that has always been beneath the surface of the monster film. The monster's body, despite being male, is another manifestation of the monster's feminine. He is an unspoken object of the woman's appetite. He can, at any moment, be chosen by the heroine over the man that the script would like her to marry. In other words, female sexuality and autonomy are what has been so scary about the monster all along. I think history supports this theory of mine as well. It was the box office success of Universal's first monster film which erupted the classic monster trend in the first place. And who accounted for much of these box office numbers but female audiences? This film, of course, was Dracula.
I am Dracula.
Women wrote me letters. Oh, not me, this is a quote. Women wrote me letters. Ah, what letters women wrote me. Letters of a horrible hunger, asking me if I cared only for maiden's blood, asking me if I was in reality that sort of thing. And through these letters, crouched in terms of shuddering, transparent fear, there ran the hideous note of hope. They hoped that I was Dracula. They hoped that my love was the love of Dracula. They gloated over the thing they dared not understand. It gave them something as potent as poison, as separate from their lives as death is separate from life. It was the embrace of death their subconscious was yearning for. Death, the final triumphant lover. It made me know that the women of America are unsatisfied, famished, craving sensation, even though it be the sensation of death, draining the red blood of life. I could think of no better description of the female fan response to the 1931 film adaptation of Dracula than these words from Dracula himself, actor Bela Lugosi. Like Dracula arising from his coffin, Lugosi's moody, domineering characterization of the vampire seemed to awaken something hidden, unspoken in female audiences. As he gets at, this desire was something deeper than the fleeting feelings of lust that male viewers might get at tantalizing images of women on screen. It was the thing they dared not understand, something potent as poison and separate from their lives. It was a way out, a sense of control over their own lives and, just as much, their own deaths. The traits which made Lugosi's Dracula so mysteriously, unknowably attractive are the ones we still associate with Dracula to this day. The dark hair with a widow's peak, the furrowed brow, formal clothing under a black cape, and a thick accent. But these were not the traits of Count Dracula in Bram Stoker's original novel, who was more of a shadowy, elusive figure who appeared to be of an indeterminate age, with pointy ears and white hair growing in strange places. It was perhaps not the film's intention to make Dracula sexy, per se, in changing his appearance from the source material. Rather, I think this displays the aforementioned ways in which classic monsters were perceived to threaten the Western patriarchal order. Dracula represents a foreign threat rather than a man-made scientific threat. Someone who behaves and speaks differently but dons the attire and pomp of high society, invading it from within. Most frighteningly, he stalks innocent women in their sleep, hypnotizing them and luring them away from their lovers and to their deaths. Of course, how could a bunch of male studio executives in the 1930s possibly predict that the idea of being lured away from their static lives was actually not so threatening to women audiences? How could they predict that Lugosi, a foreign, largely unknown actor in his late 40s, who was partially given the role because of his willingness to accept a very low salary, would become a breakout sex symbol? But Dracula's subversiveness only went so far. The film came to represent only a desire for autonomy, a curiosity about the unknown, rather than depicting a woman acting out of her own impulses to fulfill her sexual appetite. In 1931's Dracula, the heroine Mina acts out only under the spell of the vampire. She is clearly in a trance-like state, her eyes glazed, saying bizarre things, and speaking to bats.
There's that bat again.
Yes?
Look out, he'll get in your hair.
Yes?
When the spell is lifted, she is once again at the whims of her husband, restoring order as normal. But it is in an earlier adaptation of Stoker's novel that we actually see something quite different. Nosferatu, a Symphony of Horror, is a German expressionist film released in Nosferatu, a Symphony of Horror is a German expressionist silent film released in 1922. It is an adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula, made without the rights to the novel, much to Stoker's widow's discontent at the time. But many changes were made to the story. Count Dracula became Count Orlok, played by Max Schreck, a rat-wielding, plague-spreading creature who posed a much wider national threat. And of interest to me, the relationship between the Count and the heroine, here named Ellen, as well as the characterization of Ellen, are starkly different from those in the source material and in the 1931 film. Here, Ellen does find herself under some sort of trance which connects her to Orlok, and yet she doesn't seem to be acting under the vampire's control. Early on in the film, she uses the visions she gets in this trance-like state to prevent Orlok from attacking her husband, and as the vampire's plague-spreading rats are unrelenting, it is Ellen who saves the day with her implied sexuality. In the world of this iteration of Dracula, as Ellen discovers, nobody can save you unless a sinless maiden makes the vampire forget the first crow of the cock. Pause. If she was to give him her blood willingly, and willingly she does as she lures Orlok into her bedroom right before sunrise, his bite killing her and the sunlight eviscerating him. If you've seen Eggers' Nosferatu, you'll know that these plot points have remained, but their themes of female sexual repression, shame, and yearning have been amped up to a violent, visceral degree. The supernatural link between Orlok and Lily Rose Depp's Ellen infects not just her mind, but her body, causing it to seize and contort. In the end, her luring of the vampire as an act of sacrifice results in full-on intercourse between the two as they meet their deaths. Perhaps with this, Eggers' Nosferatu fills in the blanks of the original, made 102 years prior, making explicit what could not have been before. With this full story of Nosferatu in mind, a different formula of the monster film emerges. In the end, the patriarchal order has been disrupted. A sinless woman has corrupted herself to an outsider. She chose the monster, and yet the day is saved. Though Bela Lugosi's Dracula has seemingly sexual motives and his portrayal sparked a sort of awakening in female audiences, it's this strange hybrid Dracula interpretation of Nosferatu which weaves the female sexuality of audiences directly into the narrative. But this comparison brings to light what is perhaps the most interesting difference between the two adaptations, the appearance and sexual attractiveness of the Count. What could it mean that the version of the same story in which the woman is given sexual autonomy is also the version of the same story in which the woman is given sexual autonomy is also the version in which the vampire, the object of her hunger, looks considerably more frightening and considerably less attractive? What could this inadvertently tell us about the true nature of female desire? While Eggers' 2024 Nosferatu openly provides this insight into the female perspective, its casting of the monster further complicates these questions of attraction and monstrosity. Eggers' Count Orlok is played by Bill Skarsgård, a Swedish actor and member of the endless Skarsgård clan who had famously donned prosthetics for a monster role before, as Pennywise in the late 2010s It franchise. But Skarsgård was apparently not the first choice for this role. The actor was originally considered for the lead role of Thomas Hutter, which later went to Harry Styles, and then ultimately to Nicholas Hoult. For the role of Orlok, Eggers had initially eyed actors like Willem Dafoe and Mads Mikkelsen, who are both significantly older than Skarsgård. Of course, Skarsgård isn't entirely the heartthrob that, say, Jacob Elordi is, and given that Pennywise is his most iconic performance, his casting wasn't all that of a stretch. But from what I found, Skarsgård himself was surprised to be offered the role, and I couldn't seem to find any substantial reasoning as to why, on Eggers' part, such a pivot in casting was made. Perhaps even in a gothic, provocative horror film in which a human has sex with a vampire, such an age gap between Ellen and the Count would have been too uncomfortable. Or perhaps the director's reasoning is not that deep. Regardless of the intention behind this decision, it surely had effects on the portrayal and reception of this relationship between the Count and Ellen. Skarsgård's portrayal pays a visual homage to Max Schreck's iconic Nosferatu, with pointy ears, a dark trench coat, high cheekbones, and gray skin. But he also has the allure of Lugosi's Dracula, with his booming, beckoning voice and his outstretched claws, the massive shadow of his hand over Ellen's face becoming a highly memorable image from the film, one that is both threatening and erotic. He bridges the gap between the inhuman and the humanly attractive. As viewers, we see the ghastly illusion created by makeup, but we know an attractive young actor hides inside, and we search for glimpses of him. And even more fascinatingly, I've seen a number of young female viewers online cling to these parts of Orlok that are human, describing his dynamic with Ellen in terms of romantic relationships in a very 2020s manner, jokingly comparing their high-stakes push and pull to a toxic situationship, or more seriously regarding Orlok's side of the relationship as grooming or abusive. Perhaps the film's ultimate casting of two people similar in age bolsters this modern relationship reading. Lily Rose Depp herself seems to share this view of the dynamic as a sort of metaphor for modern relationships, stating, "I'm a sucker for a crazy love story. If you were to remove the supernatural, demonic element, it could be this girl caught between the good guy and the bad guy. The vampire represents all of the bad shit that she's so drawn to and can't help but feel slightly titillated by. Although there's so much fear and dread and shame, it's not dissimilar to how shameful you can feel when you're, I'm just speaking generally, in a relationship that you know is terrible for you, and you know that this guy's treating you so badly, and all your friends are like, why are you doing this? And you're like, I know." I'll admit, I initially thought of this analysis/comparison to be a bit reductive, representative of social media's tendency to promote a very specific internet slang-induced reading of a film and rule out a lot of space for alternate interpretations. But I'm gonna humbly get off my high horse and investigate young women's instinct to understand their complicated relationship to sexuality and toxic relationships with men through this horror film, and vice versa. After all, times have obviously changed since the 1920s and 30s, as have dynamics around dating, gender, and power. Young women are no longer seeking a sexual awakening as a form of escapism from their domestic lives. Rather, many young women have already explored their sexuality and still remain mystified by it. I think there's some credence in Depp's words as well. With much more freedom around dating and hooking up comes the freedom to choose the wrong person, a thrill which can be alluring, dangerous, and exciting. There still remains something existential about it all. Similar to Lugosi's words about women's fascination with Dracula and death in the 30s, viewers of Nosferatu seem to be especially struck not merely by the act of sex between Ellen and Orlok, but by the final image of death that follows it, in which Ellen's corpse lies with her arms around the corpse of the vampire on top of her. Ellen's death is not a punishment, but not necessarily a heroic sacrifice here either. It's dark curiosity leading to self-destruction, something I, as a female viewer, find harrowingly relatable. So finally putting it all together, this latest Dracula adaptation, Nosferatu, builds upon the story's own history, weaving a portrait of female desire that is death-defyingly monstrous, not in its tabooness, but in how it feels for the woman as subject. But what of the man as the object of her desire, as a being her monstrous appetite envisions and creates, like Anna from Possession? Well, creating a monster, I don't think I need to tell you where we're going with this next, so come on. Let's get the title card in already.
We are about to unfold the story of Frankenstein, a man of science who sought to create a man after his own image, without reckoning upon God.
I saw the pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside the thing he had put together. I saw the hideous phantasm of a man stretched out and then, on the working of some powerful engine, show signs of life and stir with an uneasy, half-vital motion. Frightful must it be, for supremely frightful would be the effect of any human endeavor to mock the stupendous mechanism of the creator of the world. His success would terrify the artist. He would rush away from his odious handiwork, horror-stricken. He would hope that, left to itself, the slight spark of life which he had communicated would fade, that this thing, which had received such imperfect animation, would subside into dead matter, that he might sleep in the belief that the silence of the grave would quench forever the transient existence of the hideous corpse which he had looked upon as the cradle of life. These are the words of Mary Shelley herself, who was just 18 when she thought up a story on a whim, while stuck indoors due to harsh weather with friends, challenging one another to see who could write the most terrifying story. This story, of course, became Frankenstein, the now legendary tale of a man who attempts to play God. There's an eerie meta-quality to Mary Shelley's account of the creation of the novel itself. This idea of her own making seemed to haunt and horrify Shelley as much as the Dr. Frankenstein was revolted by his creature as soon as he crafted it. In this sense, Frankenstein is inherently a woman-authored monster, but our cultural associations with the creature have strayed immensely from the bounds of the original book. The image of the creature has quite literally taken on a life of its own. He himself is a Frankenstein version of what he once was. This reconstructed image of the monster in pop culture can surely be owed to James Whale's 1931 Frankenstein, in which the monster, played by Boris Karloff, dons the neck bolts, broad forehead, and unintelligible grunts that are still instantly recognizable today. Though the film is certainly iconic and landmark for a reason, it is worth noting that many liberties were taken with Shelley's novel here to create a tantalizing horror picture in the wake of Dracula's smash success. The film changes major character names, a majority of plot details, and most thematically transformative, the arc of the monster as a character. Rather than exploring the world autonomously, learning knowledge and empathy as Shelley's monster did, the monster of the 1931 film never develops from a grumbling, stumbling brute. The doctor, named Victor in the novel and Henry in the film, is changed too, in a way which has developed into the pop cultural image of a mad scientist that we think of today. Seemingly possessed by his scientific urges and famously shouting, "It's alive," at his creation, this version of the Doctor is certainly portrayed as morally wrong, conveying the tale's ultimate point about the man who plays God being a monster and the monster being truly innocent. However, in making the character a sort of lab coat-clad caricature, we lose the real human evil that the original story was a warning against. I posit that this human evil is toxic masculinity, present in the Doctor's insatiable drive to abandon his morality in pursuit of greatness and notoriety. Luckily, this true threat of the character is impeccably reintroduced into the story in Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein. Now, I absolutely adored this film, so I will try my best to provide constructive analysis rather than just singing its praises, which I really want to do. But anyways, Del Toro's version is incredibly true to Shelley's novel while containing new additions that still remain faithful to the story's themes yet feel fresh and contemporary. Much of these additions were an expansion of the character of Victor, providing him with a bit of backstory but not really with the intention of creating empathy for him. Instead, it's this backstory which makes his masculine evil all the more unsettling. This Victor, played by Oscar Isaac in an incredible performance, I must add, was pushed to his limits as a child by his father, a scientist himself, and faced mistreatment from him, especially following the death of his mother, played by Mia Goth. Victor had a strong bond with his mother, a seemingly innocent detail, until we meet his love interest later in life, his brother's fiancée Elizabeth, who is also played by Mia Goth. Elizabeth exists in Shelley's novel and the 1931 film as Victor's fiancée, a part of his life that also becomes threatened by the monster. But in Del Toro's film, Elizabeth plays a different role. Intellectually curious with scientific ambitions and opinions of her own, Elizabeth is a woman that Victor cannot have. She denies his advances, a rejection so unfathomable to the arrogant, blindsided Victor that it speeds up his ongoing descent into madness, which propels him to create the monster. When the monster is born, after an anxiety-inducing, rapturous awakening sequence, Victor banishes him to the catacombs and degrades him, mimicking the way his own father once spoke to him. We don't condone his behavior, but we recognize the source of it: unresolved family trauma and a sense of possession and entitlement over those he deems less than him. It's something we see in many men. But now I'd like to turn to the monster, an innocent and pure force that directly opposes Victor's cruelty. The monster is played by Jacob Elordi, who is truly the star of the show here. Elordi's monster is instantly sympathetic, coming to life completely bare and bald, his skin gray with inhuman seams and scars all over his face and body from where he was stitched together from human remains. He cowers and fears Victor. He's a far cry from Karloff's original monster, who came to life with a foreboding stature, stalking around with his hands outstretched menacingly. And of course, unlike in the 1931 film, Elordi's creature undergoes a transformation, learning to read and speak eloquently, becoming curious and caring, and undergoing human experiences of pain and shame. Again, it's Elordi's casting here that fascinates me. Like Skarsgård in Nosferatu, Jacob Elordi was not the first choice for the monster. Andrew Garfield was initially cast in the role. Garfield is a great actor, but we kind of already know that, you know? Of course he'd be able to pull off a role like this. But Elordi's pop cultural image is a little different. While I have known him to be a very talented actor, his popular projects like Euphoria and The Kissing Booth are in the young adult realm, let's say, and he's often been regarded for his looks. He's a generational heartthrob with his approachable charm, his stylish and expertly staged paparazzi photos, and his height of 6'5". When I heard he was cast as a hideous Frankenstein creature, I was a little confused but incredibly intrigued. But that's just the thing, Elordi's monster is nowhere near hideous. Though his heavy prosthetics do give him a grotesque, uncanny appearance at times, I feel that the look of the monster was not intended to mask what is already alluring and attractive about Elordi. On his casting, Del Toro said that it was Elordi's eyes, their quote, innocence and openness, that spoke to him. And ultimately, this version of the monster is a reflection of these natural traits of the actor. Where part of the allure of Skarsgård's Count Orlok was in knowing there was an attractive actor underneath a frightening costume, Elordi's image and appearance feel like part of the role. For a character meant to experience the nuanced beauty of humanity for the first time, it now actually makes perfect sense that someone like Elordi took on the part, someone revered for his possession of masculine beauty. His monstrosity doesn't lie in being terrifying or menacing, but in bearing the scars of being discarded by humanity. Like in Shelley's novel, we are thrust between the perspectives of Victor and the monster, but between Victor's evil self-interest and the monster's innocence, I find it is Elizabeth's complex perspective and her attitudes towards both of these men that we ultimately identify with. Elizabeth rejects Victor and has a loving, curious interest in the monster. I believe that this is the missing piece to everything that I've been yapping about this entire time. This so perfectly represents female desire and longing, what we as women seek out, a rejection of obnoxious masculinity which doesn't take us as equals, and a yearning for something different, something of our own monstrous creation. Through Elizabeth's perspective, we become attracted to the monster because he is everything Victor isn't. Would it be crazy to say the monster is even a bit feminized in this version? Not just because of his long, luscious hair, but also his softness and lust for life. Like, not to say the monster is kind of giving non-binary to you, but like, a little bit. Seriously though, something about the monster being created and brutally rejected by the masculine machine makes him so identifiable with Elizabeth and the female viewer. And after this rejection, he starts anew and defines becoming a man in a fully autonomous way, uninfluenced by patriarchal standards. And in the film's final shot, there is something very cathartic, life-affirming, and good for her, as in him, about the way Elordi's creature walks off into the Arctic sunset, a slight smile on his face. This ending feels incredibly contemporary. It carries a 2020 sense of persevering, of simply living, even through evil and darkness. It gives Girl Who's Going to Be Okay. So between Nosferatu and Frankenstein, we can craft a modern, complex image of female sexuality and the monster. We crave the thrill and the darkness, but on our own terms. And yet what we desire is beyond man. It is being seen, understood. It is the joy and terror of being alive.
What do you think of the hot rodent boyfriend?
I love hot rodent boyfriends. Besos to all of you out there.
All right, okay, this is the moment you've all been waiting for. How the hell is this girl going to tie this all into hot rodent boyfriends? Well, all this movie talk does have some real-world applications, and I'm sure you can see the threads of where I'm going already, because women don't just seek out monstrosity in the movies. A lot of the portrayals of sexuality in these monster films are being experienced and shared about today, particularly by young women on social media. Users on TikTok and the like have gotten very vocal about what they seek in a romantic partner, constantly creating new terms to describe and categorize their dream celebrity men. There's ugly hot, a man who doesn't have conventionally attractive features but is still strangely attractive. There's hot ugly, a man who does have conventional features and yet is unattractive to women. There's medium ugly. To be so honest with you guys, I'm lost on this one. I keep seeing it. I don't know what it means. But finally, we have the hot rodent boyfriend, a man with mouse-like features, such as large ears, beady eyes, and perhaps a mischievous little smirk. So basically like Nosferatu, because he has the rats. Okay. Users can get very defensive over which man belongs in which category, but honestly, I've seen the same white men floating around all of these categories. Timothée Chalamet, Maddie Healy, the Challengers boys, but where did any of this come from, and why are women seeking this kind of attractiveness out? Well, if we want to talk about where it literally came from and all began in recent pop culture history, I propose an answer. I believe that this recent ugly hot man fixation began one humble day in 2018 when Ariana Grande was dating Pete Davidson. This relationship was like the shot heard around the world. Like, where were you when this picture dropped? And I do remember, actually, I was walking home from high school. For some reason, it was just unfathomable, even amusing to the masses, that this beautiful, unpredictable pop star was dating a gangly, self-deprecating SNL comedian. But in the social and political climate of 2018, there was something charming about it. Shortly following the Me Too movement, I think it was oddly refreshing to focus on Pete Davidson's appearance. I mean, for once, it wasn't the woman who was being scrutinized for her looks. Davidson was talked about the way women have been talked about constantly for as long as we can remember, whether in the public eye or in private scenarios. I think this celebrity relationship started a string of similar celebrity relationships and maybe even expanded the consciousness of what women are attracted to, beyond extremely limiting patriarchal standards and expectations. Now, in 2025, as we are constantly making these new categories to describe men and debating who goes where, we are actively rethinking and rewriting the ways we talk about gendered attraction. I think this very naturally reflects the way sexuality and attraction are incredibly fluid and ever-changing in young women. I also think it is so revealing that young women want to describe the objects of their attraction as ugly or rodent-like, even if the argument can be made that much of these men aren't really that ugly. This shows a desire to reclaim and reauthor our sexualities, which have been socially defined for us growing up. It feels much more independent to say this man is ugly, but I'm choosing to like that anyways, than to say everyone is telling me that this man is attractive, so he is. And even deeper, it's a reflection of our sexuality feeling monstrous and shameful. For young women, sexual desire can feel like a complicated, mysterious, beautifully ugly thing. So why shouldn't we want the objects of our desires to reflect that? So maybe for women audiences and women social media users and so on, that's all monsters are now. Not these big scary things, but mirrors to feelings and fears we might not understand, but we can learn to reclaim control of. Okay, that was a doozy. I'm exhausted from writing and saying all of that, but we had fun, didn't we? I would love to hear what you think about any of these movies or anything I discussed here at all. Thank you all so much for watching me go on about stuff I find interesting. This has definitely been a little departure from my last two videos, which were much more pop culture focused, but if you haven't watched those, you should go do that. As always, all my references and sources are listed below, and as you hopefully can tell, I just love watching movies. So I've listed some more really fun Dracula and Frankenstein adaptations below that I really wanted to discuss, but just did not have room for. So if you are in the mood for further viewing, check those out. And finally, like and subscribe. Press the subscribe button like this. I'm trying to post video essays on a monthly basis now, so who knows what I will decide to talk about in December. Stay tuned. Bye.
Wait! If that was you on the phone and you on the bus, then who was flickering the lights?
Nosferatu!